Everybody, hopefully we will get a few more that come back and join us. Hope you all had a good lunch. We are pleased to present Ms. Jami Brackin. Deputy Summit County Attorney is going to talk to us about the ABCs from the legislature. Jami always does a good job, makes what those of us on the criminal side think is the boring side of the civil. She always does a great job making it entertaining and informative. So with that, let's turn it over to Jami.
Thank you. I'm going to take my mask off. It's so fun to have real people. You sort of forget what that's about. So thank you guys for inviting me back. Hopefully I will make this somewhat entertaining. Yes, I understand as a former prosecutor how boring civil can be, but it really is fun. I get it. All right, we had a lot of bills this session. You guys have already heard about some of them. We may have some duplicates that the criminal side covered as well as the civil side. But let's sort of go through these and we'll figure out what we have. A is for annexations and ADUs. I don't know about y'all, but Summit County was very involved in some annexation disputes over the summer, consumed my entire summer. There were a couple of bills passed last year. Well, let's just say they went wonky. How's that? So the Representative Waldrop and Senator McKay and some others decided they wanted to do a comprehensive overview of annexations and incorporations and figure out, the competition between the two. There were fights going on, I think, in West Weber County. There were some fights going on in Twilla County. Certainly Summit County had an issue with a cross-county annexation. So this House Bill 115 was meant to fix all of that. It was a large group from the Land Use Task Force that worked on that, and hopefully we got it right. I think there's probably going to be a few more tweaks next year. But this bill essentially says, it creates a whole new section, creating the rules for if you want to do a cross-county annexation. In the Summit County case, we had a town in Wasatch County that wanted to reach across the county line and annex a bunch of land in Summit County, and we didn't like that, and whole big fight. And the other thing it does is if, for example, there's an incorporation petition that has been certified by the lieutenant governor, then another municipality cannot come in before the vote on that incorporation and try to annex some of that land that's part of the annexation. Boring stuff, I know, but let me tell you, there's some hot fights on that one. Accessory dwelling units was also a very hotly debated bill. I think it went through about 6 amendments, maybe only 4, but it seemed like a lot. Again, the idea was that maybe the solution to affordable housing is to let everybody put an apartment in your basement. And that's really what this bill is about. It prohibits cities and counties from prohibiting accessory dwelling units that are in your house. So if it's an attic apartment or a basement apartment, that double negative, the prohibits, means that you have to allow those kind of accessory dwellings in your house. Now, there are some rules that go around that. It does have to be within the same footprint as the primary residence. The primary residence has to be occupied by the owner. There are some things that the local jurisdictions can do to regulate it, but it's the hope that maybe by making these units more readily available for rental, that maybe that will help the housing shortage. So that's what that bill does. B is for billboards. This is not in your packet because, thank heavens, these bills didn't pass. There were 2 really, really interesting, ugly, not quite sure the descriptor, billboard bills. The first one, and the picture there is that, I don't know if you guys remember that billboard. It used to be, I think, on I-80 or something, that say Poly Girl. So Senate Bill 61 was probably the most reasonable of the billboard bills. Basically what it said is that if there is an existing billboard, then that billboard could, even if it's a non-conforming use, even if it's been, there forever and it's no longer allowed in the zone, that billboard can change to an electronic billboard and nothing that local jurisdictions say can stop it. Well, obviously we didn't like that very much at all. They amended that bill, tried to make it more palatable. In the end, it didn't pass, and we're very glad about that. But again, it's the billboards, and they'll be back, I'm sure. Senate Bill 144 was the really ugly one. This is the one that Reagan signs and some others ran in response to some really clever things Salt Lake City did. Kudos to Salt Lake City. Salt Lake City wanted to develop a property, and it had a billboard on it. And the billboard lease said you can't develop your land at more than one story. Well, that really limits the property owner. So what Salt Lake City did is they bought from the owner the rights to that billboard lease. And they paid the owner for the rights to that billboard lease so that when the lease expired, Salt Lake City notified the billboard, we're not renewing, you're out, you need to move because we're going to put a 3-story apartment building on here. And they did not like that at all, so they ran this bill that basically said, not only can we not regulate billboards in any way, shape, or form, but we can't even talk to property owners about billboards in any way, shape, or form. Bit of an overreach. And the justification for this was because billboards provide a public service. Just keep that in mind. Billboards provide a public service. Fortunately, that bill was also defeated, but again, it will be back, kind of like the Terminator. C is for contraception and competency-based hiring. Again, we had a lot of bills, so some of these are doubled up. The contraception one you may have already covered. That's the one that said if an inmate comes in and they're currently on, obviously assuming a female, and they're on birth control or have a prescription, then the jail has to continue that. And the competency-based hiring is a bill that was run by Norm Thurston, and it basically says, and it's now applicable only to the state and to some degree the cities, but it basically says you can no longer have educational requirements for your job openings. You can't say a minimum education, high school diploma or college education or, 2 years associate degree or anything like that. Those aren't allowed anymore. That it has to be based upon the person's competency and experience, not their educational level. And that criteria is completely eliminated unless there's a certain certification or education that is required for the job. For example, police officers have to have a post certification. Lawyers, we need a law degree. So for those, that's accepted, but anywhere else, the state's no longer allowed to use that as a criteria for hiring people. Interesting policy call. We'll see how it works. D is for the death of concealed carry permits. I like this one because it's women carrying gun, but you guys probably are aware, House Bill 60, a person 21 years or older can lawfully possess and carry without a permit a firearm in public, whether it's concealed or not. So there you go. We're back in the Wild West. I love it. E is for EMS. This is actually not in your packet, and I apologize for that. It sort of slipped by the list of things that you probably should know about. You say to yourself, why do I care about ambulances? I'm a prosecutor. Here's why you care. House Bill 303 changed the ambulance service from you can provide it if you want to kind of service. It is now an essential service, like fire, like police. We have to provide it. And the bill completely reconstructs sort of how you do EMS and who's in charge and how you license and who regulates that. So for we civil side, that's a whole other sort of layer of law that we need to know. And ambulance cities and counties are both required to provide ambulance service, EMS services in their jurisdiction. We can contract with each other to get it done, but it is now an essential service. Hopefully I don't go too fast, and obviously if anybody wants to interrupt me, you can. Oh, sorry. F is for farming. There are a couple of farming bills this year. House Bill 171 said if you allow farming in your zoning, and you have agricultural zoning that would allow somebody to farm, you cannot regulate what they grow. Well, that's kind of a common sense no-brainer, right? Why would we care what they grow? Well, apparently there were jurisdictions that cared what they grew and had through their land use provisions prohibited the growing of hemp. So this just basically says, no, you can't regulate what they grow if it's legal. So that's what that one is. And this would apply to cities as well. Apparently, you had some indoor farming, and if you allow indoor farming, then you have to allow them to grow hemp as well. House Bill 390 was called the Urban Farming Bill. And what that does is it changes your tax status. So prior to House Bill 390, if you had, a large parcel of land that you grew crops like hemp, you could get green belt tax status, right? It reduces the amount of your tax liability dramatically in your property tax. This bill changes that, so now all you need is 5 acres. It does apply to cities, including Salt Lake City and County. And if you've got 5 acres and you have chickens and goats and, grow tomatoes in your garden, you can now get greenbelt tax status if you meet the criteria, right? Great idea. The counties are really concerned about this one, obviously, because that may greatly diminish the property tax. I represent Summit County. That's going to impact us if we have everybody on greenbelt. All these 5-acre ranchettes in Park City are now getting greenbelt. That might be a problem. So we're going to watch and see how this one works. Elections and taxes and mental health were probably the 3 biggies this year. There were a whole lot of bills on those things. I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but just understand that was a really hot topic this year. There were a lot of bills on that. How they all correlate with one another, we'll wait and see. HB 12 basically says you got to get the dead people off your voting rolls. Okay. And there's a way for the state and the lieutenant governor to help you do that in some processes. House Bill 23 changes the voter referendum with respect to land use referendums, so that if your neighbor rezones their property and it's just your neighbor's property and they rezone it, and the county commission or the city council or whomever decides that they're going to agree to that rezone, that is only that can be referred. In other words, you can get a petition, take it to referral, take it to another election, and get everybody to vote against your neighbor's rezone of their house. And it includes the rezone of single properties. That's encouraging. House Bill 70 dealt with how to track your mailed ballot. I figured they could just, track it through the tracker we get with our COVID vaccine, right? Because that's a tracker. Sorry, nobody's laughing. It's okay. This creates a process for a voter to be able to track where their ballot is, how long it takes to get there to make sure that it gets there in time for the election, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what that bill does, and that's probably a good thing. House Bill 136 and House Bill 211. For whatever reason, House Bill 136 didn't show up on the summaries. We did send that one in, but House Bill 211, they both sort of work together. This does change a little bit, again, like House Bill 23, it changes the requirements for the initiatives and referenda. It actually makes it more difficult for somebody to initiate a referendum or to petition for an initiative. Makes it a little bit harder for the general public. So I expect that at some point somebody's going to challenge these, and we'll see sort of what the courts say about that, because it does make it harder. House Bill 173 is the vote reporting requirements. That's more for the clerks about how you report the votes, how fast they get turned in, who you tell them to, and all that other kind of really good stuff that's so exciting. And Senate Bill 92 is really the comprehensive change on election amendments. There were others that I haven't put in here, like the ranked choice voting that cities can now maybe try. So, if your top candidate didn't win, then it's ranked choice voting. It's this weird system, like if you've ever gone to a political convention, you have the first ballot and then the second ballot and it weeds them out. So God bless elections and God bless taxes, because these two are the most. You can see the number of tax bills that we're dealing with. And I haven't even put like the urban farming bill on there. There are a whole lot of them. I'm not even sure you can see if it's big enough for you guys to see them. But House Bill 30 deals with your primary property tax exemption. So as you guys may know, you can go in, you can say this is my primary residence. We then reduce your tax rate to 55% of the value of the home rather than 100% of the value. There are a couple of bills that change. And it used to be that you had to come in and actually sign it in person, and you had to do it by a certain deadline. Those rules are gone. You just have to submit one. When you submit one, there's no deadline anymore. And the assessors are trying to figure out how they're going to do that. So whether or not it would apply to the current or next tax year. Personal property taxes are something that we always fight about as well at the legislature, it seems like. So personal property taxes are usually for businesses. We tax your computers, we tax your chairs and desks and all that other kind of stuff in everybody's offices, right? That's the personal property. And at what rate we tax that and how we tax that was sort of the big fight. We were able to come to a compromise. The assessors worked really well with the legislature to figure out how to do that. And eventually, I think we got to a good place. That was Senate Bill 18. The retirement income tax, if you're going to retire, that's a good one to read because it changes the way the state taxes your retirement. The local option sales tax distribution, which is Senate Bill 88, on page 74, that creates a system by which the amount of sales tax that gets sent to the point of sale place changes over the next 10 years. So for places like Park City that get a lot of sales tax, they're taken from the rich and given to the poor under this bill. But it's a very gradual sort of thing. They've also changed away some of the specialty taxes, like the RAP tax gets distributed. Smaller jurisdictions, smaller counties can use that RAP tax for infrastructure. For example, Grand County, that gets a lot of tourism, but doesn't get a lot of property tax. They can use now the specialty RAP tax that all the tourists pay at restaurants. And they can use that now to beef up their roads and beef up the infrastructure for their community because their impacts are far larger than their population would otherwise dictate. So that's a good thing. The last one, Senate Bill 104, this came out of Weber County. We now have the ability to levy a tax assessment for animal control. It doesn't increase your property tax, but it does separate out part of that property tax for the specific purpose of animal control. Woohoo! H is for affordable housing. How many of you guys have put your house on the market recently? Right? You're thinking about it because the prices are so sky high, but then you would never be able to afford anything else. The market is hot right now. If you don't know that, the market is really, really hot right now. And it makes it almost impossible to have any kind of housing that's affordable for the lower incomes. So the state has an affordable housing commission. They've been working on programs and ideas to try to make affordable housing more readily available. Summit County, we require every developer that comes in with a development, they've got to build a certain percentage of affordable housing. This program basically, it started off much bigger. It was substantially whittled down, but it basically says governments, if you have land, you can now donate that to Habitat for Humanity or some other nonprofit group to build affordable housing. Prior to that, we could only get rid of land if we got fair market value. This says, no, you can donate land if it's an affordable housing project. So that will help. And then it also sort of changes the rules on who can get money from the Olin Walker Fund. I is for inspections and investigations. Just out of curiosity, how many of you guys have heard about House Bill 98? This is Paul Ray's bill about building inspectors. I got one here, I can't see online. Man, this was a nasty bill. I just don't know how else to say it. It started off really, really bad, and it got down to just one really bad. This basically says, if a home builder who is building a single-family home, whether it's Perry Homes, Ivory Homes, Joe Blow off the street, whomever, if they are building a house, a single-family home, and they call for an inspection, maybe that's at the footings and foundation level, or maybe that's at completion or whatever, whenever they call for a building inspector to come out and inspect, that builder has 3 days to get there and inspect the home. And if the county or city's building inspector doesn't get there within 3 days, the builder can hire their own building inspector, have their own building inspector inspect the house and issue a certificate of occupancy without any kind of governmental oversight or involvement. Obviously, our building inspector saw that as a very big problem. It didn't matter, quite frankly, when we were at committee on the floor. It just didn't matter. The other thing that this bill did or tried to do was prohibit local jurisdictions from having any kind of aesthetic regulations on their building materials. In other words, if you live in, if you're in historic Park City, forgive me for the references, but that's my jurisdiction. So, and Park City has regulations that say, if you're going to build, you have to make it look like a mining town, right? We want it to kind of preserve that feel. We're a resort destination. We don't want to be, we don't want Spanish stucco kind of houses or look like Santa Fe. We look like Park City. And they regulate those kind of materials. This bill would have wiped out that ability. And even though the Land Use Management Act grants to cities and counties the ability to regulate aesthetics, this bill would have wiped it out if it's single-family homes. This bill passed in all its glorious nature. Fortunately, one of the things that the bill also did was really messed up the ability of the State Department of Water Quality to come in and manage stormwater. It prohibited them from doing that, basically. And so the stormwater folks screamed a bloody murder, and fortunately the governor listened and he did veto this bill. I am told it's coming back. I'm not sure if it's on the May special session or if it will be later, but expect to see it again. There, how's that one? As for the investigations component, this involves your law enforcement officers. If a law enforcement officer is under investigation for a violation of policy or whatever they're under investigation for, and they resign prior to the conclusion of that investigation, the jurisdiction is now required to complete that internal investigation and report it to post. So just because they quit doesn't mean it ends. You now have to finish it, make your conclusions, send it to post, and let post deal with it from there. Again, this is an effort to try to weed out the bad cops. I think everybody likes that goal. This is probably actually good policy to finish your IAs just so you have a complete record. And hopefully this will help all agencies get on the same page. But there are a lot of unfinished IAs out there, so let's hope that makes a difference. All right, see, I only have 4 jail bills. That's really good, right? I only put 4 of them on there. Some of these you may have heard about already. House Bill 95 basically says, hey, guys, you got to comply with the federal Prison Rape Elimination Act. Okay, you're required to establish policies and implement those policies, and I think there's some reporting requirements, but it basically says there's a federal law, every jail has to comply with it. House Bill 219 dealt with the inmate phone calls. You may or may not know that jails contract with phone providers to provide the ability for inmates to talk to their family. They're always collect calls. And sometimes these calls are extremely expensive. I mean, ridiculously expensive. And it really limits the ability of some inmates to talk to their families. The families just can't afford the calls. They flat out tell them, don't call me, I can't afford it, I'm not going to accept. So what this bill does is it comes in and says there is a limit to what you can charge on the jail phone calls. There's a cap. And counties, if you're running a jail, you can still contract with some of these providers, but you can't enter into a contract that exceeds the caps. So that was actually a really good one. The jail photos are now a grammar-protected document unless they are convicted. So the booking photos, you can't release anymore. Well, I think this takes effect May 5th. You got a week until you can no longer release booking photos unless they are convicted. And then the funding for jails did increase finally this year. This is something we've been hoping for a couple of years. So the base rate for jail funding did increase, and the percentages did increase for state prisoners that we house in our jails that are going through programs in our jails. We like it when the state has money. That's a good thing. K is for microenterprise kitchens. This was a bill. I don't even know where it came from, quite frankly. This was a bill that when it started said, you can open your own restaurant in your house, and the health department can't inspect it or regulate it. Anybody see an issue with that? What the bill ended up doing is saying, you can't have a restaurant in your house, but you can make, cookies and package them in your house, and you are subject to health department regulations, and you do have to be inspected. But then you can make food out of your home, package it, and then sell it. Lethal force. You guys already heard about this one, right? This changes the standard for what the officer has to consider before pulling the trigger. It's not a huge change, but it does change the standard for when lethal force can be applied. And it's when the officer has a reasonable belief that the use of force is both reasonable and necessary. That reasonable part is what they added. Not just, if there's an imminent threat to life, like it used to be, the use of force is reasonable and necessary. Here are some of the mental health bills. May is Mental Health Month, and I've asked my boss if maybe I can take the entire month off for my own mental health, especially after a legislative session. I don't think I've quite sold her on that one yet. But there were a lot of mental health bills. And the good news is that the state is recognizing this is a huge issue. Look, with justice reform and the criminal reform that we had, we know that there are a lot of people now on the streets that used to be in jails that have mental health issues. We know this is something that has to be addressed. The state is now finally putting resources and money and making legislation that hopefully addresses some of that and completes that circle on the criminal justice reform. So House Bill 130 requires that health insurances cover mental health treatment, and that would include like drug treatment and alcohol treatment. It does create grant programs to provide mental health resources to first responders, especially during a COVID year when it was really just crazy and burnout. So our first responders can get some mental health support. Senate Bill 41, I don't think that's in your packet, and HB 130 require health insurance, again, like House, I did put it 130 up above, there we go. Requires health insurance to cover the mental health treatment, as I said, and Senate Bill 155 created the 988 Mental Health Crisis Assistance Program. This is Daniel Thatcher's program. So instead of calling 911, if you've got somebody that's having a major mental health crisis, you'd call 988 instead of 911, and it sends out an emergency response team that's trained in how to deal with that. So whether or not that's, a homeless person on the street, or whether or not that's your teenager that's threatening suicide, it would be a 988 program, and the people that would respond is not necessarily law enforcement, but people trained in the behavioral health system that can respond to this. So right now, it's not going to be implemented. Right now, I think they're doing a study on figuring out how to fund it and how to best manage it. We anticipate that it'll work through your dispatch system as well. We want to make sure that everybody can provide a crisis team that's going to use the 988 system. So there's a lot of work to be done, but that's the concept. N is for no more emergency orders. If you haven't paid attention, let me just tell you that this the state legislature really hated that Governor Herbert imposed an emergency order that mandated all kinds of things and kept us all home during COVID and required masks and all this other kind of stuff. To say that they hated it is an understatement. Every single special session that we dealt with last year was trying to whittle away at that authority, whittle away at that use of emergency powers. Going back to, your basic civics, right? We have 3 distinct and separate branches of government, each with checks and balances on each other. And the executive branch, through the governor, does have the ability to declare emergencies and to declare emergency orders. The question becomes, well, how long do those last? And when does the legislative branch come in? And how does the legislative branch check that? And that's sort of the fight that's been going on for the entire pandemic. Senate Bill 195 was the bill that was passed that basically said you've got 30 days, whether that's your health department under their executive powers, to declare a pandemic and an emergency, or whether that's the governor. You've got 30 days, after which, during that 30 days, your own county or city legislative body can review it and tweak the order if they want to. But after that 30 days, if the state legislature doesn't like it, they can end it. So now you've got the state legislature imposing their will on, San Juan County and the Navajo Nation area, if they don't like the fact that they have a mask order. Not quite sure how that balances the powers, but that's essentially what the bill does. I'm sure there will be more fights to come, and we'll see where it goes. O is for off-highway vehicles. So apparently, and who has an off-highway vehicle? I don't, but I'm assuming some of you may. Apparently you have to be 18 to drive these things, not just 16 with a driver's license. I see a few nods of the head. So apparently you had to be older to drive these things. Now this bill would allow people under the age of 18, assuming that they have a driver's license, to drive these off-highway vehicles in Moab and other places. So this actually was supported by Grand County. They liked this bill. The pig bill. P is for pigs. This is a bill that is the result of a fight between a very, very, very large pig meat producing company that starts with the letter S. If you don't know who that is, that's okay, I'm not going to say it. And they have these very, very large concentrated animal feeding farms. I mean, these are those giant, massive pig feeding places that stink. They smell. And they have one, I think, in Iron County. They wanted to put one in Beaver and Millard County, I believe. And Beaver's zoning said you had to be X number of miles away from the city because you smell. And you have to be X number of, yards, miles, whatever, from water because, that's a lot of poo. Millard County, same thing. I think theirs was had to be 5 miles away from the city. The problem, of course, is that the further away from the city you get, the further away from infrastructure you get. And so you can't get power and water and sewer and all those kind of things. So the very large company filed lawsuits against these two counties, and those lawsuits have been making their way through the courts. But they've also been lobbying very hard at the legislature. And what they want is a prohibition. They want They wanted the state legislature to come in and say, counties and cities, you cannot regulate these things. We can go wherever we want to. Obviously, we pushed back on that a little bit and said, no. I mean, there are some basic planning principles that are in play here. I mean, you know, you don't want these things next to your neighborhoods where everybody lives. And so what we got was Senate Bill 130, which is not necessarily ideal, quite frankly, but it's where it ended up. And what it says is that every county and every city, every jurisdiction that has a land use and development code, you've got basically a year to amend your ordinances so that you allow these things somewhere in your jurisdiction. And that somewhere, if you've got agricultural zoning anywhere in your jurisdiction, if you've got any kind of agricultural zoning, then you have to allow this somewhere. And it has to be of sufficient size and near enough to infrastructure, water, sewer, power. I think just water and power, maybe not sewer. That they can have these large concentrated animal feeding facilities. Well, again, the reality is if you're going to have it of big enough size and close enough to the infrastructure, it's going to be really close to residential areas and cities. It's going to be really interesting to see how this one plays out and how it works. So anyway, every county's got to be able to amend their code within a year. Obviously, my team and the civil side is going to be working on that and making sure that everybody's got something. The only exception to this rule is if you don't have agricultural zoning at all, then you don't have to do this. Or if your population is such, like the Wasatch Front, where you really don't have any place to put it that's within your jurisdiction, then you don't have to do it. So there may be some Wasatch Front, you know, maybe Davis, Weber, Salt Lake County, maybe Utah County. Utah County's got land though still, so probably not Utah County. They may not have to do it, but that's what we're sort of working on. Q is for the queen, of course, because I'm a girl, of privacy. This is what I call the privacy czar bill. This is the bill that was in response to banjo. Everybody hates banjo now. It was too invasive, had too much information. We weren't controlling the data. We weren't controlling who was getting what. And now this bill creates within the state auditor's office a new director of privacy that has oversight over all of your systems and how you manage data, and especially law enforcement. So even in Spillman or whatever other system you use, the auditor's office through this privacy czar now has the ability to come in and do an audit and to determine if you are appropriately protecting the information that you have out there with other entities. It gives the auditor's office a lot of power over local jurisdictions that heretofore, the only person that could come in and do any kind of performance audit was your own county auditor. This now grants it to the state through the state auditor, through this privacy czar, and they can look at all of your systems, whether it's your property tax records, whether it's, you know, law enforcement of Spillman, might be land use applications. They're going to look at all of those systems, how they manage the data, how protected it is, and if it's private enough so that we don't have another banjo issue. R is for roads. The state, despite all odds and the forecast last year, ended up with a lot of extra money. And they put a lot of that money towards infrastructure and road projects. House Bill 433 was the bill that basically said, we're going to dump, you know, $1 bajillion, it was billions, into some very specific road projects and projects that have been on the docket for a long time. And in addition, we are going to bond for more money, I think another $1.4 billion, for more projects. There's a lot of money being put towards infrastructure and roads and improvements. You're going to see a lot of construction in the next few years. I mean, it's great news for those people that have been waiting for projects. It was great news for all those projects that didn't get to go last year. But you're going to see a lot of road construction this summer, guys, and probably for the near future. By By the way, that picture was taken by my cousin Jack. It's in Wyoming. I love it. S is for state stone. We now have a state stone. Woohoo! The state stone is the honeycomb calcite. Never even heard of it until they passed this bill, so I looked it up and got a picture. There you go. How many of you have heard of it, right? Nobody? It's pretty. All right, T is for training. A lot of training bills, most of them dealing with law enforcement officers. House Bill 409 deals with planning commissions. The law enforcement ones you may have heard about already. You've got annual training for law enforcement in mental health and other crisis intervention that is now required. You also have, that's 162. You've also got the House Bill 334, which is training for people with autism that are on the spectrum, so they know how to deal with that. You've got a lot of, again, mental health focus, training for law enforcement officers. We've added to, what is it now, 40 hours a year that they've got to do or something like that, or I can't remember what the number is right now, but they've got more to do. So some of those hours have to be used towards this. House Bill 409 deals with your planning commission. This requires that your planning commission have 4 hours of land use training every year, and that when they get appointed to your planning commission, before they take their first vote, they actually have to have 1 hour of basic land use training before they can even vote. So that bill goes into effect, and we'll see how it works. Now, the one thing the bill does do is says, for example, if you have perfect attendance at your planning commission meetings, that counts for 1 hour. Or if you go to your open meetings training, that counts for an hour. So they try to make it a little more flexible. Really this was brought by the Property Rights Coalition, and really what they were getting at is they want planning commissions and, quite frankly, elected officials, although that's not in the bill yet, but planning commissions to really understand what a conditional use permit is. Almost all of our land use litigation deals with conditional use permits. So that was the impetus. Senate Bill 102 is the one that says if you are a legal resident of the country, an immigrant that's a legal resident, you can be a law enforcement officer. So hopefully that helps get more people in the into posting into the academy. How am I on time? Oh, I got lots of time. I'm going way too fast. U is for use of force. We might have heard about that, a little bit lately. House Bill 84 was really data collection. It's part of what law enforcement now has to collect on their use of force that has to be turned over to BCI. If you're not aware of this bill, you might want to look at it for your law enforcement folks. And then Senate Bill 106 requires posts to establish the statewide minimum use of force standards for all law enforcement officers and agencies. Once upon a time, we had that use of force continuum ladder, right, that law enforcement got trained on, and, if this, then this, and then you kind of climb the ladder until you get to deadly force at the top. Law enforcement agencies went away from that several years ago because it really wasn't necessarily helpful in every situation. But it appears from this bill that, the legislature and, quite frankly, the public are looking to have at least some standards, minimum standards, not maximum, but minimum standards of when use of force, whether it's, kneeling on someone's neck, or when or if you can do that, which, by the way, you can't anymore. They passed that bill in the special session that said no more. Can't use chokeholds. You can't kneel on people's necks. You can't do any of that. But they're going to establish those minimum use of force. And then you guys, as prosecutors, you guys get to fight all those motions that you're going to get, because as well as I do that pretty much every single defense that comes your way for the next year is going to have some sort of excessive use of force, something. It's just what it is. V is for vaccine. How many of you guys got your vaccine, out of curiosity? I got my shots. Yeah, most of you. That's awesome. Not everybody's got them, and that's fine. But House Bill 308 prevents any government agency from requiring a vaccine for any purpose. Schools cannot require them to attend school. You can require every other vaccine to attend school, but you cannot require a COVID vaccine to attend school. I don't know where the logic is in that, but okay. Governments cannot require them of their first responders before they work. We cannot require them of any employee. We can't require them for any participation on a volunteer board. We can't require them whatsoever. No COVID vaccine can be required. All we can do is encourage. We can incentivize. We can tell our employees that you'll get an extra week of vacation if you do it, but that's all we can do. We can't mandate it. W is for weapons. There is House Bill 264 that requires law enforcement to file a report every time they draw their gun. Probably a good idea. I think but the reports are going to show that they're drawn a whole lot more than they're ever aimed, and aimed a lot more than they're ever used. But it has to be, it's when it's drawn and pointed at an individual that you have to file the report. So it'll be interesting to see what those statistics end up being. X is for exchange. You guys know how to use exchange in the court's website, right? You look up cases. We on the civil side use it a lot, quite frankly, to look up case files. You pay a subscription fee as an agency, and then you get passwords and access to this. What this bill does, House Bill 249, is it allows the public to access the same thing. And the impetus behind this is they wanted people to be able to look up who they're dating through the court system. I mean, that was what it's for. Basically, you can if Google doesn't tell you, you can go onto the exchange site and figure out the criminal record of your Friday night date. You have to pay a fee; it's not free, but it does allow the public access to the exchange system. Y is for you no longer have to publish in a newspaper. This was a massive bill sponsored by Senator Maine that basically went through the entire Utah code and took out most, if not all, well, it's not all the provisions, but by far the vast majority of the provisions that required publication in the newspaper of general jurisdiction, newspaper of general circulation in your jurisdiction. That's all gone. Now, the requirement is that you post it on the Utah Notice website. There is now a new website that's being created as well for these kind of legal notices. And then you also have to publish it on your own website. So newspaper has gone away the dodo. It makes me feel kind of bad. I'm sort of a traditionalist. I still read the newspaper. But these are gone. I mean, for small newspapers, this is going to kill them. I mean, this is basically what keeps them afloat, are these legal notices that's what pays for everything. So without these notices, it'll be interesting to see how long we actually have newspapers anymore. It'll be online versions, but no print. So we'll see how it goes. Last but not least, Z is for Zimmerman's defense. You guys remember George Zimmerman? The Florida take a stand or whatever it was law, that self-defense. Utah now has a similar law. But what this does is just say when that self-defense comes into play. So rather than wait till you're at trial, like the old days, now you can actually have a pre-trial hearing specifically on the issue of self-defense. And if you can show that there is self-defense as an affirmative defense, then the charges get dismissed and you never go to trial. It'll be interesting to see how that works. Again, you guys get to fight those motions, and I'm sure there will be plenty. But these are only in homicides, and I don't know how many homicides you'll have. So anyway, I am a little early, but if you have any questions, holler. Otherwise, thank you very much for allowing me to come back. I hope it wasn't too boring. And, if you ever want to come to the civil side, we rock. Okay, thanks, guys.